6, we be in the mix with that rare candy paint job on the whip. I need food for the kids, money for the rent. Fuck a lockdown, baby, I can't do that shit. And I don't never vote, cause I'm fucking broke. And either way, I know the police ain't gon' leave me alone. On a plane by to visit Glen Rock, need crypto, told me I should bring the Glock with me. So I packed up my piece and I'm sliding. Cause we might get caught up in a riot. Middle finger Trump, middle finger Biden. Fuck a left, fuck a right, is you riding? Know you love to see it, dudes rocking. Ain't no politics, baby, we just talking. From the birds to the bricks, we be in the mix with that rare candy paint job on the whip. Who you with?
All right, back to PsyOps, back to the book series. So this is the first book we're doing in this series, and we are incredibly honored to have Joshua Cutchin on, the author of our first book, Ecology of Souls, Volume 1. There's 2 volumes, actually 3. I think there's some references and whatnot. Yeah. But yeah, it's funny. I read this book. I was reading it for a while, and then I looked back and I was like, "Oh, Volume 1." I looked, and
yeah,
yeah, that's so cool. And then I think a lot of my questions for this book will probably be answered in Volume 2, which is the way to do it. You know, that's the way to set it up. I love that. But yeah, how's it going, Josh? Thanks for coming on.
It's going well. Thanks for having me on here. Yeah, I feel like. So I'm always very conscious of like, how does this look that I'm separating this book into 3 chunks? But like, it was always just going to be one book, and it just got to the point where it was like, oh, I don't think this is physically possible to put it all into one book. Like, I think that it's published through the Kindle platform on Amazon,
cool.
and I don't think that. It's gotten a lot better, their binding, but I don't think it would hold up to all 3 of them together. And totally. Thank God there is a precedent amongst these like really old antiquarian books where they would just do like a separate volume for references, because that saved me a bunch of length too. So it's one book. If people buy the ebook, the Kindle book, it's all in one place, because that's the way it was supposed to be. It's just a matter of the physical space. But
yeah. I love it. Yeah, don't listen to the haters. I love the multi-volume thing. You know, it gives you something to look forward to. You know, kind of lets you digest it. Let me introduce. Also, we have, of course, Glenn Rockney on.
Oh, hi.
Yeah, love that. Welcome on. Yeah,
yes, I'm here.
We're giving he asked if we could give him some pointers on how to run a book series. You know, he's not that well versed.
No,
of course.
I cover fiction. I cover fiction, and we're covering nonfiction today.
So yeah, we're doing 2 ends. Yeah, exactly. That's
American League and National League kind of situation happening here.
Yeah,
but also Aidan's here, and Aidan's a trooper. Aidan has been around for both of the genesis of our book series, which I think is very cool.
Honored to be.
Thank you. And Aidan was in. So we did. Anyone who's listening to will hear all this together. But a couple days ago, we recorded another treatment of this Ecology of Souls with Aidan and with Matt. That was awesome. I had a lot of fun. Thank you guys for that. Matt couldn't be here. We had Australia time zone. It gets a little rough coordinating that. But the first thing I want to ask you, Josh, about this book.
Yeah.
Who's the other gentleman on the cover besides Saint Terence McKenna, if you're willing to divulge?
That is Saint Carl of Jung on the cover.
Okay, there we go.
Yeah, I mean it's then there was the original idea was going to be Saint Terry of McKenna, Saint Carl of Jung, and then Kenneth Ring. But since Dr. Ring is still alive, I was like, maybe we'll just put the Grim Reaper there and the little Omega symbol, because Kenneth Ring was all about the Omega Project, so that's the homage to him.
Cool, so, right on. Yeah, I was Googling a bunch of. I was like, could it be this guy? Could it be that guy? And it was like some of them looked kind of like that. I'm not the biggest. I'm not well versed in straight Jung kind of stuff. Well, I don't even know what he looks like.
I really lucked out because I always try to, like, whenever I do a project, a new book project, I kind of try to make it into like a make work thing for people who are friends and friend adjacent and stuff like that. So, I always save up what I've made on the last book to pay people for the next book. And with this one, it was there was a very good friend of mine, co-author, who wrote my Bigfoot books with me, Timothy Renner. Right. And I said, Tim, I love your style, and I love the fact that you did the covers for Where the Footprints End, but I don't want people to say I don't want people to conflate like every book that I have has your cover. So like I'm looking for something that's like this Byzantine style. Is there anything? And he recommended somebody that he had on his podcast, who'd had some experiences himself, by the name of Johnny Decker Miller. And it's always great working with somebody who has an interest in this sort of thing, because like they're for example, on the second cover especially, like there are little Easter eggs that I still find. I'm like, I'm not sure what this is, and then I have to look it up myself. So yeah, they're very dense images, that's for sure.
I love that. Well, let me tell you, we decided we wanted to do another book series in addition to our fiction series. Wanted to do some, we're really into paranormal stuff, nonfiction, whatever, just all the weird new age, all that whole world of books, right? And then I had a bunch that I wanted to do, a bunch that I'd already read that I kind of wanted to redo and introduce to some people. And then this one, my work buddy actually let me borrow this. We kind of traded a few books over the last couple months, and it just really struck me. Obviously, the cover, I was like, "That's Terrence McKenna," and he wasn't super familiar with Terrence McKenna, so he got into him through that. Mm-hmm. And then I just kept coming back to this book, and I was like, you know what? This is book number one. It's just got to kick off the series. It's just too intriguing. And then through Sean Hazlitt, through Glass Darkly, awesome interview, Bigfoot interview with you recently, a couple weeks ago, I believe. Everyone check that out. Sean's been on our show before, and he introduced us, and we happened to get you, the author, on for the show. So I think it's just some good synchronicity, some positive vibes to start this thing off. So we're really honored. But maybe we could just talk a little bit about Terrence to start it off. Yeah, because obviously he's on the cover, but then you don't talk about him so much until the back 9 of this book. And I listened to Terrence for a long time, as has Glenn and Aidan, I think. Yeah. And obviously got into him through the drugs. Let's just keep it real here. And then,
right.
And then you're like, oh, wait, he's got a 6-hour mega cut on Gnosticism. And I'm like, oh, let's put this on. And then I almost listened to him like a stand-up comedian, just in the background. And
he knew how to work a crowd like no one else. Like,
it's crazy.
Funny guy. Yeah, I mean, I probably, how the hell did I come across Terrence McKenna? That's a good question. I probably through the UFO stuff. But it's the sort of thing where I, about once a year, I'll just pick a random lecture to listen to again, to sort of recenter me and reground me, because you kind of fall into his thinking space whenever you're doing his stuff. And he has just so many wonderful little quips, and it's, as you mentioned in the back half of the first volume, I mean, he's where the phrase "Ecology of Souls" comes from.
That's right.
To my knowledge, I think he's the person who coined that phrase. I think there was an album that someone released a while back, and I know that there was an art exhibition with that same name, but there wasn't a book. And it was just one of the most compelling things, him talking about the DMT space and saying, you get the impression that maybe what the space that you're inside of is nothing less than an ecology of souls. And, that wonderful phrase that he coined about, DMT being, bungee cording into the bardo.
Oh, I love that.
And it's just, and
we're going to get you right back to the episode, but I just wanted to let you guys know of a few other things we offer at Rare Candy Industries. We have a Substack with free and paid subscription options. Free subscribers get access to all written content. That includes Bob's Red Pill. That's the best thing going on the internet right now. Trust me. Paid subscribers get full access to our premium episode feed. And that's just every episode we don't necessarily want to share with the general public, if you know what I'm saying. Again, that's rarecandy.substack.com. We also have merch. That link's a little long for me to say right now, but go to the description, go to our merch store, and find a shirt that's right for you. We have Rare Candy shirts, Dr. Bronner soap label shirts, Rishi mushroom shirts, all types of stuff there. Check it out. There's got to be something for you. And lastly, check us out on social media. On Instagram, we're Rare Candy Pod, but on Twitter, we're at Rare Candy Pod 1. All right, enough of that. Let's get you back into the episode.
But then, it's what I tried to do. I just wanted to write this book about UFOs and death, right? Because that's been something I've been hearing. It's been playing in the back of my mind. But you start writing that book, and you're like, well, there's a lot of these other traditions with the souls, and then you start to see that it's all hyper connected. And once you start putting these different topics in dialogue with one another, you kind of have one of two options. You can either start writing that UFO book and then like having to digress every third paragraph to explain some older concept.
Yeah.
Or you could just do all that setup as book one, and there's plenty of UFO stuff in book one, but or you do all that setup in book one so that you can, when you get to book two and talk about UFOs, you can say, hey, this looks like this. Remember this from this chapter, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And so that was sort of the genesis of it. And I was, I've always been sympathetic to this idea for a while, and part of the reason that I was able to tackle it is because it's sort of been running in the background for me for like 5 or 6 years probably. But even so, once I started diving in, I had no idea that it would be the connections would be as robust as they are. I mean, I never thought that there would be a chapter on ancient monuments. It's always something I've been interested in, but I'm like, it doesn't really have anything to, and then like, it's like, no, holy cow, this has everything to do with this. And it does start to form this sort of big tapestry through which you can view pretty much everything paranormal. I'm not saying it's right. But it's a hypothesis that I think is worth entertaining alongside a lot of these more popular hypotheses. And I've come to a point where it's allowed me to reconcile some things that have kind of bewildered me over the years. And to that extent, again, it might not be the answer, but it's an answer. And it's kind of given me some peace to find ways that all these things that I didn't know what to do with, I kind of have an idea of what I could do with, if that makes any sense. And I'm talking about things like things that I avoided forever, like pre-birth memories and alien abductions and reincarnation and alien abductions. It's like, wow, but those stories aren't going anywhere. People are still telling those stories. They have told those stories since this, the beginning of the flying saucer era. And, you've got to integrate it. You've got to deal with it. And as Terry said, if it's real, it can handle the pressure. So if you're going to come up with a hypothesis, it's got to be able to accommodate these things. And I think it accommodated a lot of them. I could probably walk away from the paranormal and feel satisfied. I'm not going to. I've been busy at work on other projects, but I could probably walk away and be like, I've kind of said what I want to say. It's a real snapshot of the way that I think about these things nowadays.
Totally.
And I think it's interesting now here seeing the way you talk about it. Now, my intro to you was actually through the Walter Bosley show. I love his channel. I think it's criminally underrated. So everybody needs to go to Walter Bosley's YouTube channel because he has a wonderful program. But anyways, I just remember nowadays you see a lot of the stuff that comes out, like a lot of Project Bleem stuff, and it just feels very Man in Black suits and stuff. And I think for some people who are skeptics and kind of conspiracy theorists, maybe have alternative theories on JFK and things like that, they might get a little put off by some of these paranormal events.
Oh yeah.
To say that it's maybe just U.S. intelligence screwing with people. There's even the stuff with Mothman where some people say that the whole town was dosed with acid. That doesn't play out with me. That doesn't make sense with me. But I am sympathetic to those people to say, well, everything I hear now that gets put out during very critical, pivotal years might be an intelligence thing. I wonder where you stand on that type of stuff.
Well, I'm very fond of saying that ufologists are so obsessed with exopolitics that they forget that geopolitics are a thing, and this was kind of highlighted last year with the congressional hearings. I mean, there were a lot of people. There was a big audience for that. And it wasn't just ufologists, you know what I mean? And I think ufologists forget to situate a lot of these developments within the context of this ever-growing, warmer Cold War that we're in. Things like, everybody sort of wet their pants over the fact that the U.S. Navy was collecting UFO reports again, and I'm like, does that not sound like crowdsourcing for enemy aircraft to anybody else? But having said that, I've been historically very critical of the disclosure movement over the years. I've warmed up a bit because I am seeing. I think I was interpreting their end goal a little. I was placing their end goal a little bit too high, and their end goal was much more realistic. I think the disclosure movement, for the people who are actually doing it, not the people who are shouting about it online, but the people who are actually doing it, It's just trying to cause a break in the dam. Just a little bit of a crack. It's not for them to come out, for authority structures to come out and say, these are the Kleborpians from Zebel-Ganubi, and this is what they do, and this is everything. It's not about that. It's more about just sort of changing the tenor of the conversation. And it's interesting that you mentioned the JFK thing, because I think that kind of is a good model for the way that I look at it now and what I think will happen. And as I've said before, opinions like this age like milk, so take this with a grain of salt. But if you would have walked up to a normie on the street even 10 years ago, it probably would have been about a 50-50 shot that someone thought that there were shenanigans with the JFK assassination.
Okay.
Nowadays, it's like 80-20, everybody's like, yeah, something was fishy there. That's sort of the general consensus. And I think that is kind of where not only the disclosure movement hopes to wind up, but I think that is not an attainable goal. And I think that they will wind up there. I mean, just from my interactions with people are now approaching the UFO topic with the sense that there is something there, as opposed to knowing exactly what it is. They're just entertaining the idea that, yeah, it seems like there's something strange there. So that's sort of where I land on it. Having said that, we've got 70 plus years of documented, I can curse, right?
We've
got 70 years of documented fuckery from,
there's breadcrumbs
from authority structures that they've always been involved in this. There's always been a government finger in the UFO pie. And that hasn't changed. So, I take all this with a grain of salt and just sort of keep an eye on it and monitor it. I will say this. I had a very interesting interaction at Dragon Con down here in Atlanta a couple of years ago. Well, no, sorry, last year. Long story short, only about, I could probably count on two hands the number of people who raised their hand in this group of 150 as far as how many thought that the UFO phenomenon was extraterrestrial. And a majority of them thought that it was genuinely anomalous, but there were like 7 people or something that raised their hand for that. So, but the other thing is that I told them, I said, think of the person that you didn't vote for in the last election. Now imagine that they're president and they're telling you that UFOs are real. Like, do you believe them? Right. It's kind of a moot point, right? I mean, there's never going, I mean, our faith in every institution has completely crumbled. I don't think that there's any way that you're going to get everybody on the same page about this phenomena, regardless of what it is.
Yeah, absolutely. And no, exactly. It's the institutional trust. Now, if most of the population was satisfied with some of the answers they got, or with some of the patronage elements between people and party, I think people would be like, oh, there's UFOs. Sure, that sounds good. Where are they? But it does seem like a weird way to be like, hey, like you said, in the geopolitical times, to be like, hey, there's a linear travel model that is flying to Earth, and we need to stop it from happening or contain it. Whereas, like, it all goes super interdimensional. The way I get interested in extraterrestrials, whether it's as you highlight in your book, like in certain times, they might view it. These things might manifest themselves as cryptids or whatever the populace is ready to look for. I'm a little more interested in things that pop up like interdimensionally, I would say, rather than something that just travels here. Like as the disclosure might suggest.
Well, that's what Aidan wrote that piece for. It's nailed it basically too for our Substack, just offering the possibility that there is some orthogonal component to this interjecting itself. It's not just crafts traveling light years from different galaxies. And I like the fact that, to not be derogatory, but the normies that are getting into this now, they have once they get past maybe that first step, they have windows like yours to your book to travel down, where there's another layer of the onion to peel back, and there's always another layer.
And what's interesting to me is I've had conversations and I've heard things from people in the disclosure movement, and like these are all names that you'd recognize, and they're into stuff like Ecology of Souls. They're into the near-death experience stuff. They're into the consciousness stuff. I mean, a good example of that too is like George Knapp.
Yeah,
was on some appearance alongside Jeremy Corbell, and I saw a clip of him saying, you can try to separate the supernatural or the paranormal, whatever you want to call it, from the UFO question, but you can't. It's baked into the cake. Again, doesn't mean that it's not aliens, but if it is extraterrestrials, it's fucking weird extraterrestrials. It's extraterrestrials that are obsessed with, consciousness and human souls and all this stuff, So I think that's the thing that people need to sort of recognize is that, if you take something as simple as like telepathy and you want to toss that out because it doesn't conform to our current understanding of the universe and reality, then you're left with just a handful of cases, because even cases involving structured craft that never involve occupants still oftentimes will have a telepathic element to them. The craft will respond to thought in some way or things like that. So it's the UFO question is a challenge to reality itself. And it suggests that it's like when you're putting together something, or when you're putting together a piece of IKEA furniture, right? And you're left over with a couple of screws and something doesn't quite look right. And you're like, I don't know what.
Yeah.
It's a table and I could use it this way, but like, if this is not the way there's something missing. There's something wrong here that I don't quite understand, And that's kind of what the UFO is. It's the leftover nuts and bolts of the IKEA furniture.
Never been there. Can't relate.
I was just gonna say, that cuts deep.
Yeah. Now, I know Aidan will be interested in this as well. I think far and away the thing that gets you really pumped on Ecology of Souls when you read it is the Irish fairy stuff. Now, growing up, I might have been called that in a derogatory term, but I'm like, hey, there's some cool ones in here, man. Like, this is cool, but they're scary too. They're very scary. Yeah. Now, for the listeners who haven't checked this out, now just a quick rundown of Irish, the fairy in the Celtic mythology, and so I want to hear your take on it, and I'm sure the audience does too.
Well, I won't quite say that everything people know about fairies is wrong, but most of it
right.
is. So, like, you take the typical image that we all think when we think of fairies, these little effeminate winged pixies that are the size of your thumb or something, and they wander around and fly and buzz in front of you and grant wishes and. I mean, you can trace that development, but the wings are an artistic flourish that was added, if not in the late 18th century, then thereabouts. If you go back deeper into folklore, you'll find basically a race of spirit beings, for lack of a better term, although no one really quite knows their origins, that were often small, but could just as easily be the average height of an average human being. Didn't have wings, but were capable of levitation and flying, and were quite capricious. That's the word I always use. If you were good to them, they were good to you, and if you were bad to them, they were bad to you. And it's not even like you were intentionally being bad. You could bump into a fairy tree, and they'd take offense at that, and they'd ruin your life. That sort of thing. Very fond of kidnapping, oftentimes dwelling underground. Strong associations with anomalous light phenomena. And if you sort of dial back that description of fairies from being so sort of centered on Western Europe, you start to see that it's kind of, it's an archetypal thing, really. It's not quite universal, but it's almost universal in the sense that every region on Earth, every indigenous population had some sort of belief in these beings that fit those parameters. Fond of kidnapping people, of a capricious temperament, oftentimes short, oftentimes dwelling underground, those sort of things. You see them in a lot of different places. And, I've read stories of Arabic jinn that if you just swapped out all the proper nouns like a Mad Lib and put them, put all the Middle Eastern places and names with Irish places and names, it would sound just like a changeling story from Ireland, or a fairy abduction story from Ireland. So it does seem to suggest that one of three things is happening, and this is what I always return to, that I always find is just the most compelling. Either A, there was an international civilization that was exchanging myths that we don't really acknowledge today. That's interesting to me. Yeah. Or B, something like the collective unconscious and archetypes are very real and perhaps even can manifest outside of ourselves. That's interesting to me. Or C, I mean, damn it, people were interacting with things that had an objective reality to them. And any one of those three things is just mind-blowing. And I don't see a way around one of those three things being true.
Yeah. And Aidan, you've talked about it just with your family, and not whether they're super into like folklore and stuff. A lot of people seem to accept the fact that like, it's like, hey, don't mess around with, even if you don't believe in it, don't mess around with this stuff. Yeah.
Perfect
They might not believe, but they live their life as though they do. Like, you look over in a farmer's field, well tilled, and there's just a huge mound untouched, and you ask them, oh, what's going on over there? And, oh, it's the fairy hill. We don't touch that. But do you believe in fairies? Oh no, heavens no.
I remember talking to someone in a pub when I went to Ireland in 2017, and I was like, well, do you believe in fairies? And they're like, no, but I'm scared to death of them. And it's like, yep, that's pretty much it, you know.
I want to try the food. I know there's a risk, huge risk. You know, it's the best food you've ever had in your life. You know, it's just like, oh, this garlic bread. Oh my god.
Well, the fairy stuff. Or
yeah,
like,
you might wake up 7 years later in your neighbor's basement, but
I've already done that. So one time, it's not a big deal. Yeah, it'd be the second time that
let it rip.
That was the subject of my first book. Was comparing those stories to stories of alien abductees and UFO contactees being given food. And I didn't realize at the time. I should probably go back and revise that book if I ever find the inclination. But you'll find that exact same prohibition. Do not accept food in X place amongst a lot of indigenous cultures when they talk about near-death experiences. You'll find it all over a lot of different North American tribes. You'll find it throughout South America. You'll find it in some African tribes. Like if you go to the land of the dead, don't eat anything when you're there. Wow. So yeah. In fact, the sort of thing that set me on this journey, because I've always had an interest in these topics, but the thing that set me on this journey was I'll never forget, my sister-in-law had got me an Amazon gift card. I'm like, I'm going to buy a Bigfoot book. I haven't bought a Bigfoot book in a long time. And I picked up a copy of J. Robert Alley's Raincoast Sasquatch. And it was talking about all the indigenous tribes in Alaska and their belief systems. And for one of the tribes, they have a Bigfoot. Their version of Bigfoot is called the Bequas. And I'll never forget reading there. It said that, you know, if the Bequas offers you food, don't take it or you'll be trapped with the Bequas forever. I'm like, that's really specific. Like it's, you know, and you can talk about, like, you know, the more I looked into it, the more it was like, oh, there's, you know, the Persephone myth where she goes into the underworld and is given these cursed pomegranate seeds and she eats them and she's trapped there. And that's where this myth comes from. I'm like, yeah, but this is Alaska. You know, and once you start looking, you find that on every continent, it's like, okay, there's something else going on here other than just this diaspora of the Persephone myth, because, you know, I don't know how the Persephone myth finds its way into the Amazon basin in, you know, 600 AD or whatever. Yeah.
It's harder to believe and more logical than just that there's something actually there that all these people across the world are interacting with.
Yeah.
Totally.
I mean, that sort of is, you know, ties into my read on the monument stuff that I mentioned earlier. That's in volume 1 of Ecology. Is you know, these things all look the same because this is technology that works. Like this is building pyramids at sacred sites is something that works, and that's a way that we are able to facilitate interacting with this place more easily than anywhere else. At least that's the hunch that I'm going on. But yeah, it just seemed like there are these things that are sort of, I've often described archetypes as the software that we're all uploaded with when we enter Earth. You know, when we incarnate, we're given this sort of basic software suite, and the archetypes are part of it. Yeah,
we talked about that in our last couple days ago with like the Harry Potter series and J.K. Rowling, and how that kind of formatted all our hard drives. As children, we went through that together in the 90s or watched those movies or whatever. She nailed so much of this stuff. It's such a trip. It's almost like the universe or our Earth is begging to have these traditions continued, even as like a fiction or whatever, right? It won't let us escape these realities. It's really a trip.
Yeah, I've talked about this before in some other places, but like, I am a very big fan of deconstructivist media. Like, I think Watchmen is great. I enjoy The Boys. You know, is in terms of the comic world and how it's taking all those old tired tropes and sort of taking them apart and reinventing them. But at the same time, like, you kind of need these basic stories.
Yeah.
You know, in order to appreciate the deconstruction, you have to have construction at some point.
Yeah.
And so I hope that we don't completely abandon them, because I think that they really are just part of the fabric of reality, you know.
Yeah, like Tolkien. I mean, Tolkien doing that, and then like J.K. Rowling making it for the millennial generation. You always need somebody to kind of just repackage it rather than deconstruct it, I think. And repackaging it is kind of a bad way to put it, because they are great stories with expanding on it. But it is like Tolkien took pride in being at least somewhat truthful in what he was talking about.
And you know, so for every Song of Ice and Fire, Game of Thrones, like I want to have a Middle Earth, you know, I want to have a Lord of the Rings. For every Dune, I want to have a Star Wars. Like, I want to have something that is just really sort of by the numbers, archetypal, very Joseph Campbell, because they do complement each other, I think.
Yeah. Excellent. Now, you mentioned Bigfoot. I am very close to Santa Cruz, California. Santa Cruz, California is a hotbed. I don't know what it is. We have a museum. It's one of the most amazing museums. It's about the size of my 1-bedroom apartment. There is a man there that is holding on for dear life. I hope he's still with us, because he is an old weathered man, but he is just he's
an old prospector guy. You know, he's
he was so great. Suspenders and everything, but he has a map. And he has different buttons for different like he has a blue one for it was an actual sighting. There was a sound, and then a possible, like, I might have seen something in the court, and then one was an encounter. And there, right around where that museum was, there were a bunch of encounters, and a lot of them were from like utility people, people working in like public utilities up in the hills, being high up somewhere and going, "What? Why is that? That thing looks like it's right next to me." And now you've been into it for a long time. I mean, does it ever get tired? It's so cool. Every time I hear a Bigfoot story, it's like the coolest thing in the world. I get more into it, you know?
Yeah, I mean, there's sort of like a, junkie looking for his next high kind of aspect to it. You know, you kind of want the weirder stuff, you know? Some days, Bigfoot stories can feel a little bit like drinking mouthwash. But I mean, but you know, what I really just adore is you'll be going through these very rote things, and then you'll find just one little tidbit that speaks to another case, or, in my case, with the way that I've grown to look at the Bigfoot thing, did not start out this way. I was very much in the flesh and blood camp, but, these little details that people gloss over that you're like, oh, that's straight out of like this old Mesopotamian text that I read, that sort of thing. Like those are the details that like I always find really compelling, because sometimes there's these really weird things. They're like, I don't know why it did this, but it did this anyway. So and so and so and so, and you're like, no, wait, back up. What was that thing that you said? Because it doesn't make any sense in the context for what the eyewitness might have. But if you put it within this bigger mythopoetic sort of framework, you can find like tons of comparison points all across human history for these sort of things. So that's what keeps it fresh. Although, some of them do get a bit stale. I can definitely see that.
I still remember Art Bell playing the sound that he got. That is like, I have the sound of the Bigfoot, and nobody believed him. I mean, like, some people believed him. There were a million people. They're like, no, that's like the sound of this. I'm in the military. That's like a military sound that they use. But I love the community, and I just love the community of it. I love that they believe. I mean, I don't want to see it, but I've been in those hills before, and out of the corner of your eyes, you see some weird stuff, man. Like, I don't know. Have you ever encountered anything, not even Bigfoot, but just in general, like any like actual like sighting of something that you couldn't believe? Like,
well, and also, if not this, please retell your story that you told on Sean's about the car wheel well.
Okay.
And just if you don't have anything else, I'd love to hear that for our audience too.
No, I mean, I've had some things happen here and there. Yeah, it's the kind of thing where I think that there are some areas that are more prone to having strange stuff of all kinds, but at the same time, I do think that everybody's backyard is a miniature Skinwalker ranch, you know.
Yes.
But the things that happen are so small that you don't notice, or you shrug them off. I mean, I've often toyed with that idea. Like, how many times am I sitting here in front of my, you know, at my desk, and I see something out of the corner of my eye, and I'm like, what was? No, it was nothing. It was a shadow. And you keep on going. Like, that happens like 7 times every day for everyone. And, you know, only one of those has to be genuinely strange. So I kind of wonder that sometimes. So yeah, I've had some ghost stuff happen. I've had a little bit better luck lately with some mystery lights, knock on wood. I've had some Bigfoot adjacent stuff. Again, I can't really say that it was or wasn't Bigfoot, but the most recent Bigfoot thing happened back in 2019. I was with Tim Renner at one of his research sites, and we pull up and we get out of his car, and we're standing there in the woods, and within like 30 seconds to a minute, we hear something huffing, huff, 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 and then walk away from us. It's pitch black. And, you know, I'm familiar enough with like whitetail grunts. I don't think it was a whitetail deer. I'm bad with footprint sounds, but it didn't sound like it was moving on 4 feet. Tim said it didn't sound like it was on 4 feet, but it huffed and it walked away from us, and that was it. The other thing that I think is probably the more interesting story was it was my honeymoon. So this would have been 2013. And we'd just gone up to Blue Ridge, Georgia, and gotten a cabin for a couple of days because we didn't want to do anything extravagant. A little to my knowledge, Blue Ridge is kind of another one of those Bigfoot hotspots that you alluded to. And like the last night we're there, I'm drunk and I'm in the hot tub, and I'm just like, I'm doing like Bigfoot calls, like finding Bigfoot style Bigfoot calls, these big whoops and stuff. And like
horsing around.
The cabin was on the side of the mountain, and there's a valley below us. So it was echoing through the valley. And I thought I was so funny. The next morning we're packing up, and my wife goes to take a first small load of stuff out to the car. And she comes back and goes, "Why'd you do that?" I'm like, "What are you talking about?" She's like, "The rock." I'm like, "I don't know what you're talking about. What are you talking about?" And we go out there, and there's this rock, not quite basketball size, maybe like cantaloupe size or something, you know, but a substantial rock, probably between a cantaloupe and a basketball. And it's like wedged behind my driver's rear wheel, just like wedged there. And I look over to the side of the mountain that's like 40 feet from where the car is, and it's all Georgia red clay. All the rocks are covered in red clay. There's nowhere else I see this rock could have come from. Yeah. The driveway up to this place was like, I don't know, like a quarter of a mile. You know, not quite 45-degree angle, but it was really damn steep. And I'm thinking to myself, I'm running through the different scenarios, and it's like, well, maybe it was some kids, but if you're gonna prank me, like that's a lot of effort to come up the hill, and then like wouldn't you put it on the hood of my car so I would really notice, like do something obvious, you know, or on my roof or something. So I can't explain it. I should have taken photos. I think probably on one of my. I think my wife may have taken a photo at the time, but you know, that was like 3 phones ago, whatever. But yeah, nowadays I would obviously have taken a photo and documented it with, like, you know, my wallet beside it for scale and all that stuff. But yeah, so that was an odd moment. And I'm hard pressed to find an explanation for it that doesn't veer into Bigfoot territory. Yeah.
Love it.
That's crazy. I don't even think about it like in the South too much, but why not, right? I mean, it's the same, you know, I hear about it in the West Coast a lot. I mean, we're just out here, so we hear about it more, and you think about the Appalachian, you know, mountains and stuff, but
I mean, Pennsylvania, Ohio, people will tell you that Bigfoot has been seen in 49 states, and there aren't any Hawaiian Bigfoot sightings, but they have giant sightings that I've found over the years that sound very Bigfoot-like. And, you know, I've collected accounts of Bigfoot in, you know, urban Chicago parks, like really weird places. Wow. And, you know,
watch out, Aidan. Yeah.
The orthodox cryptozoologists will start talking to you about like migration patterns and they slip in under the cover of darkness and they're really good at hiding, and my eyes just sort of glaze over because it's just like
yeah.
Or you could look at this the way that a lot of, not all, because you can't speak about them monolithically, or you could look at the way that a lot of indigenous tribes did, which was, some of them looked at it as an animal, but a lot of them looked at it as a spirit, or at least an animal with really strange superhuman, abilities. And that's sort of where I wound up. I was to this day, the first book that I'm going to press into someone's hand if they express an interest in Bigfoot is Jeff Meldrum's Legend Meets Science. It's a great book, and Dr. Meldrum approaches this from a very tactile, in a very tactile way, talking about dermal ridges and mid-tarsal breaks, and it's great science.
Yeah.
But I also sympathize with the skeptics who are like, "Why don't we have a body?" And I'm like, "Yeah, we should." Full stop, we should. But at the same time, you talk to these people, and the evidence for something there is so good. You start to say, okay, there's got to be a way to reconcile these things. There's got to be a way to reconcile these two things. The fact that skeptics make a lot of good points, and people see things. Like, where's that in between ground? And that's what sort of led me into this weird territory where no one seems to appreciate in the crypto, at least in the crypto, amongst the cryptozoologists. Never been invited to a cryptozoology conference.
Wow.
Yeah, and Footprints has got I think I don't remember, but it's maybe 1,000 reviews on Amazon. Don't get me started. But
that's crazy.
Yeah. Well, but it speaks to sort of the mindset of cryptozoology that's very much this 19th century imperial colonialist. Bag it and tag it, kill it, bag it and tag it. We'll listen to the indigenous people up until the point they start getting weird, and then we'll be like, oh, they're primitive, but they are describing a real animal. That's sort of the vibe of cryptozoology to this day, and they're going to have to reconcile with that at some point because, number one, it's a bad look, and number two, it's going to prevent any sort of advancing of the field, I think. So I wound up in the place that is much more sympathetic to a lot of these indigenous views, that it is, at the very least, something physical with these super normal abilities. And I tend to think that we're looking at something that's maybe a spirit, but what does that even mean?
Right.
Who knows? Something archetypal, again, what does that even mean? But something stranger that has more in common with, quite frankly, fairies, spirits, witches, and UFOs than it does an orangutan.
From the 5 to the 6, we be in the mix with that red candy paint job on the whip. I need food for the kids, money for the rent. Fuck a lockdown, baby, can't do that shit.
Yeah.
Imagine being an orthodox Bigfoot researcher. Whoa, man, that's a little too. You're obsessed with Bigfoot, but this shit's way too wild for me. Yeah.
Well, and the funny thing is,
yeah.
The funny thing is, I don't think that there are as many of those as the community would have us believe. And what I mean by that is, I've often said with ufology, and ufology's gotten a lot better about integrating these weird outliers, but with ufologists, you grab the lecturer after their presentation and immediately take them to the hotel bar and get a couple of beers in them. Yeah. And then they start to open up about synchronicities. That's the big thing with the UFO stuff. I'm pretty sure it's aliens, but my reality is warping around me as I'm investigating this stuff. Right.
Yeah.
Similarly with the Bigfoot people, you get a couple of drinks in them and you start having them open up, and they'll start saying things like, yeah, I still think Bigfoot's a primate, but we did go out to this one hotspot one time and we didn't see any Bigfoot, but we did see these strange lights that I just can't explain that were bobbing along the ground. Yeah. As Tim Renner says, it's rare to see Bigfoot. It's rare to see a ghost light or a UFO, whatever you want to call it. How much rarer is it to see those in the same area, together sometimes, or close, close in terms of how much rarer is it to see those both and then to not be connected? I know that correlation doesn't imply causation and all that stuff. But I just think that once you set that alongside the stories that you get and some of the things that have been, again, deliberately overlooked in cryptozoology, and it starts to add up to a much stranger picture.
Correlation should at least pique your interest. That's the way
Absolutely.
I look at it. Like, yeah, maybe we're not saying maybe we're not saying it's and the answer is bang the gavel, you know.
Well, what you don't do is you don't say, I'm not going to talk about these experiences because they don't agree with what I think the phenomenon is. And so, you know, I'm trying to be like hyper aware of that in myself. And do you think that I like talking about pre-birth memories and alien abductions, or reincarnations and alien abductions? Like, something about that just, I still find it off-putting to a degree. Certainly less than I did, but like, I still am like, I don't know what to do with this. And in a lot of Ecology of Souls was an effort to reconcile that, because again, the stories aren't going away, and you can evaluate people on a case-by-case basis, but I think it's disingenuous to completely omit somebody else's testimony, but just because they're saying things that don't flatter your personal opinions.
Well, that's what I like about your work, is that, and I get this vibe from Ecology of Souls, can't wait to read more, is that you're putting it all out there, not as this smorgasbord, but as a very careful, like, we have to account for all this. You're doing what a true scientist would do, in the real sense of the word. And the Bigfoot, we talked a little bit about this last episode. The Bigfoot UFO thing, correlation for me is so interesting, because for a while in my younger years, I all just put this into the weird box, and I was like, yeah, I believe in all that stuff. But I didn't realize how literally correlated they were. And then I watched I'm always bringing this up, the Unsolved Mysteries Navajo Ranger episode in the new season of Unsolved Mysteries on Netflix. That episode in particular is crazy. They have a Bigfoot sighting by a woman, and then the next night she sees a UFO. And then I hear that, and I'm like, what? You know, this is crazy.
Yeah.
You guys got to check out that episode. Is crazy if our audience hasn't listened to it yet. So many little stories like that, and I think every single one of them would have an example in the Ecology of Souls, the connection.
Well, Dr. Jeffrey Kripal, who's been incredibly supportive of my work, he's professor of religion at Rice University.
Go Owls.
Go Owls. Yeah. He said something on an interview relatively recently that has really stuck with me, and I think it kind of describes where I've arrived at too. He said, "I believe everything, so I believe nothing," and I kind of love that. Like, you know, and the other way that I said it before I heard that much more succinct quote is that, like, I have three baskets in my head. I have a true basket and I have a false basket, and those are pretty small. But there's this basket in between that says interesting if true.
Hell yeah.
And man, that thing is just like flowing over the sides. You know what I mean?
That's a shipping container, dude, for me.
Yeah.
Like,
shipping container.
40
I like
by 20.
that. I like that. Yeah. But that's the part of the thing that frustrates me, is that, like, so many people go into these topics with what my mentor Greg Bishop calls a certainty fetish. Like, they want to, like, know exactly what it is, and, like, there can't be any outliers, and I can't even try to reconcile them. I'm just going to say this is where I'm staking my claim, and all that other stuff is bullshit. And it's like, well, we're all in glass houses here, you know. Yeah. Again, talking about, you know, normies, like, we're all looking pretty crazy. So
exactly.
Don't like, you know, don't throw stones at the glass houses of the ghost people, and, you know, ghost people don't throw stones at the glass houses of the Bigfoot people. Like, it's there's room enough, and I think that's part of the reason that sort of the scholarship in these fields has stagnated, because there are these certain paradigms that we're operating underneath. Ghosts are dead people. Bigfoot's a giant monkey. UFOs are from, you know, intergalactic civilizations, and, like, that's the only thing that we're doing, and we're just focusing on that. And you know, if it doesn't work after 70 or so years, maybe you should start entertaining other ideas, you know?
Right. Well, and it almost feels like that madness factor, that unsolvability, is part of, like, the phenomenon. Like, it's not supposed to be solved. It's supposed to drive you crazy going into it. And it was interesting when you were in the book talking about like the shamanic initiations, and how it's almost like face to face with that insanity, diving in and coming back and still being sane. And kind of, how all these phenomena kind of do mimic that on like a minor scale, albeit, but it allows us to kind of look into this thing that's unsolvable. You can look at it as many times as you want and still not really land on anything solid or physical.
And that's an excellent point. And I've read a lot of books on these topics. My interests tend to gravitate towards theory more than they do just a bunch of accounts. But there is one book that I've read, and I think that if you just sort of follow if you're making bets on paranormal developments, what's going to happen in a certain case or situation, if you follow the advice in this book, I think you're always going to come out on top with making the correct prediction. And that's a book called The Trickster and the Paranormal by George P. Hansen.
Oh, cool.
It's a very dense book. It's a bit like reading VCR instructions. And maybe I'm dating myself with that reference, but even 20 years from now, it will still be like reading VCR instructions because it's that opaque. And that's not really even a knock on his writing style, but it's the kind of book that you have to read a paragraph at the time and then sit it down on your chest and think about what he just said and then pick it back up. But one of the things that he does talk about in that book is that like these things thrive in this area of like plausible deniability, and it's always going to be a fringe topic. Like it's just sort of the nature of it. It's that trickster archetype that's being manifested. It's the nature of it that it's always on the fringe. You'll have some great evidence come out, and then a year later the person will be revealed to have had some hoaxes in their past, so it casts the whole thing in doubt. It's almost, Hansen sees this as sort of almost being orchestrated at a meta positioned level. And I've just seen it happen too many times, that sort of thing, that I'm like, it kind of sounds like that might be what's going on, to the point of shamanism. There are these, Hansen actually calls it the sham of shamanism, and that sounds very uncharitable at first, but once you read what he's saying, it makes a lot more sense, where there are these like psychic surgeries where a shaman will extract a foreign object from someone, and it's almost always sleight of hand, with some chicken guts or something that they've sort of palmed and made it look like they've taken something out of you, but the people get better. Like that's the thing. So it's almost like by creating this space for, the way that I would put it was by creating the space for the imagination to flourish, you actually allow the imaginal, which is more concrete than the imagination, to come out, to exist, to thrive. Another way to put that is like, if you suspend disbelief, then that teases out genuine paranormal phenomena. And that seems to be something that, again, you can apply that to the UFO contactees. You can apply that to a lot of poltergeist cases. You can apply that to a lot of these different things. And so that's a book that it's one of several that I just keep returning to as being like, okay, what would he say about XYZ? And it tends to be right in my experience.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I just had a question, because looking at your website, I noticed that one of your earliest passions was music. Mm-hmm. And I listened to a guy, and I'm not sure if you're familiar with him, and I know Aidan listens to him too, but Dr. Joseph Farrell, who will he's really into music too. I think like organ is his instrument, and he talks about, and again, perhaps I won't be the right person to even ask this question, but he talks about certain either chord progressions or scales, kind of like being keys and like portals in a sense. I'm not saying but I just noticed a lot of people I know that are really open to this kind of stuff and want to explore it tend to come from a musical background. So I'm just wondering, is there a connection there?
Well, I mean, yeah, that's part. I go to a church that has a contemporary worship service, and part of the reason that I don't like the contemporary worship music is that, Bach is like sacred geometry. All that Bach church music, it's like hearing sacred geometry unfolding in front of you, and like to replace that with a guy just strumming the same four chords over and over again with a capo is like, it's kind of a step back, I go here to be in a sacred space, not in a coffee 100%. In a coffee bar.
I'm a Catholic. I
I think that Christianity has done itself a disservice by stripping out some of the mysticism and some of the strangeness, quite frankly, that is baked into early Christianity.
It's so inherent to it, in the history of it.
It really is. I mean, Christianity is pretty esoteric if you go back to sort of
100%.
roots.
Yeah.
But anyway, whatever. But to that point, I would sort of even broaden that spectrum and say that like it's just artistic people in general are drawn to this. I don't know if we're all crazy or what, but it's something that you see going way back. I mean, if you look at, just focusing on just the Irish fairy tradition, who was always abducted? Well, women and children, people who were deemed by their societies to be defenseless. But after that, it was musicians and artists, there's something about like being closer to that world that I think sort of encourages engaging with this stuff. And the number of, I think I can't say for certain, but I would imagine that a number of like famous musicians have more UFO sightings than famous actors and actresses and, directors and producers. And so I'm not exactly entirely sure what that is. I mentioned him before, but Greg Bishop, who's been a real guiding light throughout all my studies, has been encouraging, UFO investigators to engage with the other side of the brain. They usually go there and they're like, name, address, time of sighting, how big was it how big was the object compared to holding a quarter at arm's length? Like these really dry questions.
Yeah.
And the questions are never really like, how did it make you feel?
Yeah.
One thing that he's starting to encourage some people to do with some success is before you even ask a question of the witness, like hand them a box of crayons and a sheet of paper and be like, draw something related to this experience. Doesn't matter how good you are, just draw it.
Yeah.
And see what comes out from that before you even start asking those nuts and bolts questions. And, I know this sort of starts to sound touchy-feely and sort of new age love and lighty, but like, I keep coming back to this thing that like these experiences can often be so personal and so tailor-made. And I'm not saying personal in the sense that like, I've got a specific guardian angel watching over me. I mean more personal in the sense that like your dreams are personal. Like,
oh yeah,
you tell me your dream, like, if any of you told me your dream from last night, I'd sit here and I'd be real polite, but I actually don't give a shit.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Thank
And it could mean something to you. Like my wife does this all the time. I love her for it, but she'll be telling me this dream that like that means something. that she'll be telling me this dream that like seems really profound or weird or something. I'm like, oh, okay. I'm happy for you.
You kissed another girl in the dream, and I'm mad at you all day. Been there, dude. Yeah.
I guess my point is, and synchronicities are like that too. I mean, like people come up to me with your synchronicities, and like, I saw 1, 2, 3, 4 on the clock again, and I'm like, okay, cool.
Yeah.
Because it's for the person, it's on a person by person basis. So if that is indeed the case, that there's something really intimate about this thing, and I don't know what that means. I don't know if it's a one-to-one communion with the divine, or that we're projecting these things out into 3-dimensional materialized space from the inner workings of our heads. I don't know. But if it is a personal thing, then yeah, it makes total sense to engage with that creative side too, because like that's the expressive side. Yeah.
You just brought up a lot for me with all that. That was actually got a little bit of chills just from that last segment. A great question, great answer. Because we're really into remote viewing too. We kind of play around with that, and
nice.
And associative remote viewing, and just having fun with sports and stuff like that. And Lynn Buchanan, one of the pioneer remote viewer guys, who was that military, name, date, like super a lot of, and we've joked about this. A lot of the military remote viewer guys were super categorical, spreadsheety, just insane with it. Yeah. And then he realized, he's like, well, I think he read this book that's not a paranormal book, not a remote viewing book, but it's just by this artist, this woman, like a Bob Ross type lady, who I think it's called Drawing on the Right from the Right Side of the Brain or something. Basically, like, drawing expressively from your subconscious and getting the gestalt from that, the kind of vibe of the whole thing. And that he said that translates really powerfully to remote viewing. So that really made me think of the crayon thing that you discussed, where I think even just to unlock the key, just a key to unlock that door to allow stuff to flow through that is really powerful. And
I totally agree. And I've sort of seen a little bit of that in my work too. I mean, like, without exception, like some of the most important references or books or essays or research papers that sort of form my conclusions in every book, they're not UFO books. You know, they're like something that seems completely unrelated from out of left field that, you know, people just don't really even bother to put within this context. And so to that extent, it makes perfect sense that a book like that would lead to more successful remote viewing. I mean, it makes sense, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. And the music thing, I've always felt the weird thing about music. Well, it is a portal for sure. There, you know, we all know that. And but and I 100% agree with you guys on the Bach thing. You know, that really is, 'cause I do think that's a big, I know Rupert Sheldrake talks about that, about, that's one of the key ways in the Western world, you know, we lost with new atheism, modern atheism, is you don't have a place to go and sing on Sundays anymore with your family and friends, right? And things like that. And but music's always interesting because it's so objective. You can go to a concert with your friends, and it's so subjective. You can zone out with your headphones in. It's might be the most stark example of that. And we all know these things are combination thereof, you know, and there's severe subjectivity to all this going on. And we were talking last episode about the paranormal, about Zeppelin. That's like another Harry Potter, J.K. Rowling thing, where you're like, oh, these guys were into the symbols and the cool occult stuff too, and you know, maybe got a little dark with those guys. Who knows, you know? But and Bowie, of course, we were fans on the,
Well, the thing about too, like making music, and I still experience this to this day. You know, I've always been classically trained, found my way to the more fun stuff, which is, you know, I still appreciate the classical stuff, obviously, as I just alluded to, but I found my way to the more fun stuff, which is like, you know, New Orleans music. But the thing about playing in these bands is like that usually the only person that can talk in the middle of a song is like the drummer. Like everybody else has got something on their face, right? But it's interesting because, like, in my experience, if you play with a band long enough, you do sort of create this like Sheldrakean telepathic communication field.
Sure.
You know? And like the number of times that I've just been able to look at somebody in the band and everybody shifts into this thing that we've never done before, or so, you know, just like that sort of spontaneity that you get. And look, part of that is like playing with people for long enough and realizing their tendencies, but sometimes it's been like so effortless and smooth. It's like, no, like there's a better signal here than just me giving somebody the googly eyes, you know. There's something else going on here, and I think that we really underappreciate that. And I think it speaks to the fact that, you know, the way that music and pharmacological altered states of consciousness play so well together, you know. Like there's a reason that those are complementary things. I think that, you know, music is like an altered state of consciousness on demand, and when you when you combine that with better living through chemistry, you know, it has this sort of amplifying effect, I think.
Yeah, because when I listen to music, it's all I see it. I feel like I don't know. It's weird. I don't know. I'm not a you know, guy that plays a bunch of instruments or anything, but I see it like a certain like heavy guitar is going to be red in my mind, and it's just random colors pop up, but like nothing else is like that to me.
Have you read into synesthesia at all?
I have a little bit. I haven't read deep into it. I know what it is because I've brought that up around someone, and they've been like, "Well, that's what that is," and I would like to read more.
I knew a girl in undergrad who like had flavors associated with chords. like that. Like it was weird. It was like, you know, we just sit around and we'd like play things on the piano and be like, how does this taste? Like, you know, it was
cool.
really weird.
That's cool.
And that's funny that people, you know, like jazz, obviously a lot of musicians, especially jazz musicians, reference chords and inversions and such as flavors, you know. So that's like, you know, reharmonizations and stuff. That's so cool. Yeah. I was wondering if I could just indulge. So we had this family friend. I think I've told these two stories on the podcast before, but I'd love to hear your take on these. I'll try and make them quick, although they are sort of in-depth stories. This woman is an experiencer, like you've described before, you know, someone that's just like a magnet for this type of stuff. Yeah. So the first one, and I just, you know, very cool person, very Tolkien-esque kind of person, right? And but the first one, so she went to a Waldorf school, right? And when she was, I think, really young, 4, 5, 6 or so. And this is in Santa Cruz Mountains too. So these are both Santa Cruz stories here. And I have some thoughts on that too. It's really interesting. But so they always do nature walks in Waldorf schools, right? And she got lost from her group, went down by the stream with this little makeshift bridge and encountered these 2 trolls under the bridge, right? As a little kid, but from far away. And then she turned. Yeah. And she turned and she saw 2 gnomes right next to her that were like kind of her height or a little shorter. And she's like a toddler, right? And they're like, wouldn't go over there if I were you, just follow us. We'll take you to safety. And they hike her down all the way through the Santa Cruz Mountains down to the coast on the west side of the city. And to where and they have a conversation. They're smoking corncob pipes and everything. And then to where she's found by adults, and and they're like, how'd you get down here? And she's like, well, 2 gnomes guided me down here. And they're like, oh, whatever, And to this day, she swears this happened, right? On her life, basically. And the second story, she lived still in the Santa Cruz Mountain chain, but a little more south, like Corvallis-ish, same kind of deal. But so her and her fiance lived in this house in the middle of the woods, maybe one set of neighbors, like half mile away, kind of thing. And I'd been there a few times, and we would drive through there, and it was definitely fairyland for sure. And like right at the start of their driveway is this giant fairy ring of like redwood trees. So they were going to sleep one night, and she had this dream of being abducted aboard a UFO craft and having surgery done on her. Very common kind of situation there. And then she woke up at 3:30 a.m. in the middle of her fairy ring at the end of her driveway, and then walked back to the house, and all the doors were locked because she was apparently teleported out of her house in the middle of the night. And her fiance had to come and unlock the door and everything. And they were, they'd sleep at on the top floor, basically. So something weird was going on there. And then she started complaining about back pain. And a couple weeks later, she's like, I got to go to the clinic. And she went, got an x-ray, and there was a tiny little hunk of metal in her shoulder blade, basically. And they removed it with surgery. And the doctors tried to keep it too, first of all, which is weird. She's like, no, I gotta keep this thing. And this is like 3 weeks after this incident. And it's this little stamped piece of super silvery metal with these 3 little symbols on it. And she showed us. We were kind of around when this was all happening. And we all like worked together, like family, and she was a family friend and stuff. So anyway, I just would love to hear your thoughts on that. Because it didn't happen to me, but those 2 stories always stuck with me. Yeah.
Well, that second one certainly gives me the willies.
Yeah.
And that is something that you find, that people have contact early in life, and then it sort of continues with them through their lives. Back in the probably pre-80s, there was a time when people who had multiple experiences were looked down upon. They were called repeaters, by ufologists. And now the tables have turned, where it's like seems to be that people are experience prone, personalities.
Yeah.
It's gotten to the point where I just can't. It's become so hard for me to differentiate between the UFO stuff and the fairy stuff. And the moment, so for the longest time, big fan of Jacques Vallée, Passport to Magonia, 1969, first book to really sort of blow open this connection and sort of interrogate it. Some things were left on the table, and it's not me knocking Dr. Vallée. It's just like, this has just been the gift that keeps on giving, I've found in my own research. But for the longest time, I was like, yeah, it seems like they're pretty similar. I think that they might be the same thing, but they're pretty close. They're pretty close. And the thing that blew it apart for me, where I just don't make a differentiation nowadays in my head. I mean, obviously I'll talk about them differently, but like, I just don't make a differentiation in my head, is something called the fairy blast. Have you guys heard about this?
No.
Is that the fairy shot, the gunshot?
Well, it's similar. So blast, blister, and blustery all have the same root word.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason that they do is because if you were targeted for whatever reason, as we've said, fairies were very fluid in their temperament. If you were targeted by the fairies, they might hit you with a fairy blast on a blustery, windy day. There'll be a big gust of wind that would hit you. There'll be the fairy blast. And it would leave behind a blister. And in certain parts of the world, especially, you know, Western Europe, more specifically, you know, Ireland and Scotland, these wounds would be opened up, and what would come out would be things like bits of teeth, bits of bones, sticks, bits of metal, bits of hair, like anything, just trash, debris. You know, debris would come out. And I was like, holy shit, that's an alien implant. Like, it's the exact same thing, because nowadays, like, you know, people are operated on who have had these implants, and it's always like, oh, it's always revealed to be like a piece of glass or ceramic that, you know, has calcified and stuff. And the nuts and bolts extraterrestrial ufologists will say, oh, it's technology that's so advanced it doesn't even look like technology. And I'm like, or there's this thing right over here that we used to know about and used to talk about. That is basically the exact same thing, and it seems to manifest to me in an almost identical way. And that was when I was like, okay, this is probably the same thing. And that's not to say that UFO occupants are fairies, and that's not to say that fairies are UFO occupants or are aliens. I'm just saying, like, there's this thing that has been interacting with us probably since time began, right? Or maybe it piggybacked with us when we started using language. I don't know, but it's been with us this entire time, and whatever we call it is just dependent upon what our culture calls it and what society calls it. And the thing that is the least outlandish for our culture and our society to tolerate, right? That's what we end up calling it. So yeah, and you know, just that sort of idea of these foreign objects, if you can go back even, you know, further, because that's like, you know, sort of the fairy stuff's kind of tied up in Christianity, so that's a more recent interpretation. But if you go back to these indigenous cultures, like there are these extensive traditions of, you know, evil magicians that would shoot you with spirit darts that would, you know, pop up under your skin. And to this day, I think it's some Yoruba practitioners in Africa still employ people who like take foreign objects out of people that, you know, sorcerers have inflicted them with. So it's like this thing has been around for a long time. Yeah. And it's just something that seems to be really consistent. And so I would think that that's kind of what your friend experienced. That story gives me the willies. What do the symbols look like on it?
So yeah, it was crazy. It was the piece of metal itself was like the size of like a pinky nail, maybe a little bigger. And the shape, it was like thin and long and flat and stamped almost like a flattened Snickers bar wrapper or a candy bar wrapper. Okay. And then the three, I wish I could remember the other two symbols, but what was really crazy is one of the symbols was like a Jesus fish, right? Clear as day, you know, the whole, so I'm like, and I know that has a long, so I know that has a long and storied history, but it was so shiny. It was like such a shiny piece of metal, almost like platinum-esque, you know, and it's just such a trip. And believe me, it crossed my mind, like, is this person pulling a prank? Does this person have this weird like making things up fetish or something? I don't know. And what you said about the fairy thing, I was like, that is so interesting that we're like, oh, it's UFOs. Because if she came to us and was like, "Oh, I got captured by fairies," it'd be like, "What the fuck are you talking about?" You know, it'd be like, in our culture, we're like, "No, that's dumb." You know, that's
100%. Yeah,
like Peter Pan. Yeah.
Well, it's like that's people's go-to, right? When they're talking about something like Bigfoot that seems a little bit more believable, they'll say things like, "Well, it's not like they're talking about a leprechaun," and it's like, well, I mean, I don't really think that's. I don't think that's the argument you think you're making here. Yeah. But yeah, and so my rule of thumb, and granted, I probably believe everyone what they tell me more than I should. Doesn't mean I necessarily believe their interpretation.
You believe that they believe, though.
Yeah. And like, you know, but I get especially suspicious when somebody's like, the beings told me XYZ, so XYZ is true. And I'm like, okay, well, or they were lying to you. Like, that's an old Emanuel Swedenborg thing. Spirits lie, you know? So like, 100%. let's engage. Let's be a little bit skeptical about the sources that we're dealing with here in terms of these beings. But like for experiences, I tend to believe a lot of what they say. I will say that one of the sort of rules of thumb that I've come up with after speaking with people is when their stories seem a little bit too tidy, that's when I sort of raise my eyebrows. So like when they're able to make like really clear sense of it, that's when I'm like, I'm not sure if they're, and again, I don't think that they're lying. I think it's probably an artifact of interpretation where they're trying to make it make sense. But if somebody's like, oh, and they did this to me because I was selected to be part of Ashtar Command, and then it gets like really Star Warsy, and it gets really like it's like an elaborate mythos that's built around it. The people that I always find compelling are people like your friend who are like, this happened to me.
No idea. Yeah.
I don't know. Or like, those are the people that I'll, if your friend had come back and been like, oh, they implanted me because I was part of a hybrid program, but I was selected to be a host for one of the human alien hybrids, but they actually rejected me because my 7th vibration wasn't high. And I'm like, okay, that's when I start to go, something weird. Something weird happened. Let's leave it at that and try to sort of be agnostic about our interpretation.
Yeah, we had a lady at my work who was just always having like bandages on her face and whatever, and she was just like, oh yeah, at night somebody's been coming in and planting bear DNA in my face, and I was like, and then she mysteriously was fired for crystal meth reasons. So I was like, it was a different thing. I was like, look, I'm not trying to hate on anybody, but it was like she had the narrative, she had the plot, she had the resolution and everything solved, and I was like, just write a book. Now,
if she had been saying something is coming into my room and scratching my face at night, I've been like, okay, sure. I buy it. And even if she'd said, somebody came into my room and is scratching my face at night, and they told me that they're implanting bear DNA in my face, but I don't know what that means. That I just know I'm being attacked. Like then, like okay, gotcha. But when it's like really specific, it's like, oh, this is exactly what's happening. Then I'm like, well, maybe we should sort of reevaluate.
She thought it was like Island of Dr. Moreau was happening in her house. Like, it's just like, I don't think I just don't think that was simply the gay. I mean, I wanted to believe, but it felt too tidy.
Too tight. Yeah.
Well, the other, I don't. What's that?
Oh, just the other thing about the Santa Cruz. So I've heard these. I think I heard it from the Bigfoot guy in the Santa Cruz, the Felton Museum, or someone connected to him or something connected to that, where. And I'm sure this applies everywhere, but there's all these lore in the Santa Cruz Mountains about, oh, this is a really peaceful part of the forest right here. This is a real hot spot. This one's like a little more negative. And I think what's the part by UCSC, like Pogonip, and the
no, I know what you're talking about. It's scary out there. It's scary.
Yeah, and you could tell there's different parts of the forest that have these different energies. I'm sure it's the same in Georgia.
Kind of like Empire Grade, off of like Empire Grade. That area.
Where it's scary. Like sometimes you're walking through and it's like totally peaceful. You're like, man, this is like some high vibe kind of patch. And then
I know exactly what you mean, because I this past the first week of April this year, I was with a friend of mine in the Uwharrie National Forest in North Carolina, and it's a weird place to begin. I spoke with multiple people who've had some odd experiences up there. He's had some really odd experiences himself. And it's weird because it's not part of the Appalachian Mountains. It's like just smack dab in the middle of North Carolina. There's this mountain chain, and speculated apparently to be like one of the oldest land masses in North America because it began as an archipelago like almost 1 billion years ago or something wild like that. Millions of years ago, I guess I should say. But it was a beautiful place, but it was not a welcoming place. Like, and I wasn't really even like trying to like psych myself up. Been in the woods plenty, and like and it wasn't even malevolent. It was just like you kind of felt like this thing, just you weren't wanted there. Like, get out. It was odd. So totally. The vibe check is a real thing. Yeah,
it is. It is. Yeah. So, well, I don't have anything else for Josh, but just real fast before we go, just let everyone know where they can find your work and your books. I'm sure.
Can I actually do have one question real quick? Actually,
sure. Please.
There was something in your book that really stuck with me. Was the idea of like people getting too caught up with the key instead of the room, like it opens, in dealing with like psychedelics. And well, because I like the idea of each of these substances like opening up like possibly different doors or different like places that you go to. How do you feel about the idea that like take acid? LSD, like all of like the history surrounding it, the negative energy, the uses that it has been put through, do you think that there is sort of like a bleeding effect per se onto it that kind of makes it more of a negative experience or kind of taints the key, so to speak?
That's a good question, and I love that. I love that. I mean, like I find a lot of utility in that analogy, because it's like you tell somebody you went to Michigan and they're like, well, you had a car, and I'm like, yeah, but I went to Michigan. Well, but you had a car. Like, everybody who has a car goes to Michigan. It's like, no, I'm telling you, like, I went to Michigan. So here's where I sort of land with some of the newer psychedelics is I'm sympathetic to the idea of things like egregores. And certain substances kind of have their certain characters that are attached to them. Mm-hmm. I wonder if this discussion of LSD and probably even something like ketamine would look different in 700 years. You know what I mean? So, like, I wonder if as people have more experiences that get added to that field, if the sort of character of it wouldn't change. And to that degree, like, you know, if we lose all knowledge of where some of these newer substances come from, and there's a belief system that gets built up around them, like, if, again, the character wouldn't change, the experiences wouldn't change. You know, I really can't say. That's sort of the main thrust that I would have, is I just don't think they've been around long enough to build up all that accretion. Like the barnacle beliefs are not on LSD enough to sort of give it that sort of character. And that might be why, I mean, you know, I'm not sure. I've had the impression of people that I've talked to that the good trip, bad trip thing on LSD is much more of a razor's edge than it is with other things, if that makes sense.
Yes.
And so that to me would speak to the fact that, like, it kind of hasn't gotten a real character yet, you know. Mm-hmm. But again, that's super speculative. It's just sort of leaning on that sort of egregore idea.
Fascinating,
you know. But that's sort of where I would land on it, you know.
Mm-hmm. Well, like I said, Josh, where can everybody find you? Where can they find your work? I know you have your website, joshuacutchin.com, but where else can they find your stuff?
Yeah, this absolutely flew by.
A lot of fun.
Yeah, all my announcements will be on joshuacutchin.com. I'm on Instagram. You have to search for me, and I can't remember my handle because my wife set it up for me. But that's Joshua Cutchin, author, on Facebook. I left the cesspool of Twitter like in 2018 because of UFO Twitter.
Was it crazy? Was it crazy?
Well, you know, I was sort of, granted, I was poking the bear a little bit, but you know, I was hyper skeptical of the disclosure, like the Tom DeLonge stuff. I was taking the piss out of a lot of that.
Yeah,
and then the death threats started coming in, and it was like, I'm just gonna close down my Twitter.
Yeah,
and it was like the best thing I ever did. So Joshua Cutchin, author, on Facebook. Search for my name on Instagram, and joshuacutchin.com is where you can find out everything you want to about me, about my books, projects that I have coming up, and conferences and things like that, announcements. If anyone is interested in picking up Ecology of Souls, if you buy it straight from Amazon, they don't have a bundling option, but I do offer the full package at a discount. So sign for me. Just we'll work out PayPal and Venmo and all that stuff. So
that's cool.
Reach out to me through our website.
Excellent. So now if you're listening to this, if you're new to the program, you wanted to hear Josh on a podcast, Cy did cover on his PsyOps Book Club inaugural episode. That is on rarecandy.substack.com. That's our premium feed. And if you're listening to this episode for free, we appreciate your support. Gain of Fiction, Philip K. Dick's Valis is out now. We covered that. And then we're covering Anthony Burgess's A Clockwork Orange shortly after that. So on that note, guys, everybody have a safe week. Catch you guys next time.
Thanks, Josh.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Josh. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Take care.